Buckingham Palace. An early October evening in 2025, rain drizzled against the tall glass windows, and the golden light from the chandeliers spilled across the cold marble floor. Inside the king's study, silence reigned until a sharp, dry sound broke it. A thick folder had just been slammed onto the desk. "I've been betrayed in my own house." The voice of King Charles III was hoarse, heavy with fury. None of his aides dared to breathe. It was said that no one had ever seen the king this enraged since the day he ascended the throne. The reason lay in a financial document recently sent from the Windsor Foundation, the royal charity personally overseen by Charles and Queen Camilla. Within it appeared both Camilla's and Prince Andrew's signatures, authorizing an investment of £3.2 million into a private asset fund based in Jersey. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary legal transaction. But what infuriated the king was that he had not been informed. Worse still, the accompanying memo revealed that this investment is to be regarded as an internal arrangement between Queen Camilla and Prince Andrew, intended to restructure the Windsor family's financial influence. According to a palace insider, the king shouted, slammed his hand on the desk, and said, "I trusted you, and you've been building an empire in the shadows." The story began to leak after an internal accountant at the Windsor Foundation sent an anonymous email to The Guardian, exposing a private meeting between Camilla and Andrew at Clarence House, just weeks before Charles returned from Sandringham after his medical treatment. The pair had reportedly been seen leaving together through a back entrance, unaccompanied by any security staff. One detail stunned the media. Andrew, once stripped of nearly all royal titles after the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, was suddenly reappearing in royal circles as Camilla's financial advisor in a multi-million-pound project. Why would Camilla take such a risk? And why would Andrew, the man long branded as the royal disgrace, be trusted enough to co-sign a financial document tied to the Windsor Foundation? A source close to Prince William revealed. When the king found out, his anger wasn't just about the money. He believed it was the sign of a power play, a secret alliance between Camilla and Andrew, designed to control royal assets and influence in case his health forced him to abdicate. Since Charles's hospitalization in April, Camilla had been taking a more active role in internal palace meetings, particularly those dealing with royal finances. Meanwhile, Andrew, after years of isolation, had started reappearing at charity events, this time under the title of representative of Queen Camilla. Another palace insider explained, "Camilla no longer wants to be seen as merely the king's wife. She wants to control the system, to manage the funds and the people loyal to Charles. And Andrew is her perfect pawn, desperate to crawl back to the center of power." The incident sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace. Within hours, an emergency order was issued to freeze all financial activities of the Windsor Foundation, pending a full audit. Royal lawyers were summoned within 24 hours. The media quickly caught the scent of a major scandal, but the palace maintained absolute silence. The question now is, was this merely a financial misunderstanding, or was there truly a deal in the shadows, where Camilla and Andrew were quietly consolidating power, preparing for a future where Charles might abdicate sooner than expected? To understand why the king's fury ran so deep, and why Camilla chose this exact moment to act, we must rewind 6 months earlier, to the quiet birth of an alliance formed behind the thick, cold stone walls of the palace. April 2025. The lingering chill of spring winds swept across the gray skies of Windsor. While the nation focused on Prince William's first official appearances as the king's representative, a far more discreet movement was taking shape within the royal family. After weeks of treatment at Sandringham, Charles's health had visibly declined. He was forced to suspend many official duties, with William stepping in for high-level engagements. It was a practical decision, but for Camilla, it was unsettling. She could feel attention drifting away from her, redirected toward Britain's beloved couple, William and Catherine. The press had begun calling them the future of the monarchy. Camilla, who had spent years fighting for acceptance, now found herself fading into the background. One afternoon inside her private room at Clarence House, Camilla sat watching her husband, frail and silent in bed. Charles didn't read, didn't speak of duty. He seemed withdrawn from the world. She knew that if he abdicated now, everything she had built would collapse. When William became king, Catherine would be crowned queen, and Camilla's name would be reduced to a historical footnote, the woman once despised, who broke through, only to be erased by time. In that state of mind, Camilla began to contemplate how to secure her own power, at least in terms of finances and social influence. She thought of Prince Andrew, Charles's younger brother, now living in quiet isolation at Royal Lodge. Since the scandal involving Jeffrey Epstein, Andrew had become a forbidden name within the walls of Buckingham Palace. He had been stripped of his military titles, cut off from royal funding, and banned from official royal duties. Several newspapers even reported that he was drowning in debt, struggling to afford the upkeep of the £30 million estate he still called home. Andrew, once arrogant and powerful, was now merely a shadow within his own family. And it was precisely that downfall that made him approachable, a pawn with potential value in Camilla's eyes. One morning in early April, Camilla's car quietly left Buckingham for Windsor. The trip did not appear on any official schedule. She told her secretary she needed a day of rest in the countryside, but her true destination was Royal Lodge, the house where Prince Andrew lived among the faded echoes of his once gilded life. According to an insider, that lunch took place in a small dining room. No servants, no recording devices, just two people long branded as the royal family's stains. Camilla spoke first. Her tone was calm, but her intention was clear. Andrew, you and I both know what it feels like to be cast aside. They forget that we were once part of this family. But I believe, of course, if we join forces, things can change. Andrew stayed silent, his eyes flickering with suspicion. He had heard enough false promises in his lifetime. But Camilla pressed on. She reached into her handbag and placed a folder on the table. The first page bore the title, Windsor Foundation Renewal Plan. It was a detailed proposal to relaunch the dormant Windsor Foundation, a charity she nominally sponsored, but which had been inactive for nearly 2 years. Inside was a plan to create a subsidiary fund supporting former royal members in charitable work and personal rehabilitation. The project aimed to raise around $3.2 million through businesses with royal connections. Camilla proposed that Andrew co-sign certain grants in exchange for an opportunity to rebuild his public image as a man giving back to society. But beneath that generous gesture lay a colder calculation. If Charles were to step back due to illness, Camilla would need an ally close enough to the bloodline to protect her interests, and Andrew fit the role perfectly. Despite his disgrace, he was still the son of Queen Elizabeth II, a legitimate prince of the realm. His presence beside Camilla would help reinforce her public persona as a queen devoted to charitable service rather than merely the wife of a fading king. After a long silence, Andrew gave a dry laugh. I've got nothing left to lose. If you want to work together, I'm in. And so the first agreement was silently sealed over lunch that day. An unofficial alliance. No signatures, no witnesses, but one that carried the dangerous mix of desperation and ambition. From that day forward, contact between Camilla and Andrew became frequent. Some calls were made late at night. After Charles had gone to bed, documents from Camilla's office began to include Andrew's name under the title Charity Project Advisor. No one within the royal household questioned it. They assumed the Queen was merely helping her disgraced brother-in-law. But in reality, a new financial network was quietly taking shape. Camilla as the strategist, Andrew as the bridge linking her to former royal donors. In Camilla's work diary, the date 12th May was marked with a discrete symbol, AWF meeting. According to a former Clarence House staff member, that was the day Camilla and Andrew met with a Middle Eastern businessman who would later transfer £3.2 million into the Windsor Foundation's accounts. Everything unfolded in silence. No one at the palace knew a thing, until those very documents landed on King Charles's desk months later, igniting a fury that spread like fire through the night. What began as an innocent lunch soon became the spark of the biggest royal crisis since the death of Princess Diana. A deal once meant to offer comfort had turned into the detonator of a palace earthquake. It all began with what seemed like a harmless idea, the Windsor Foundation, a project Camilla presented as a symbol of compassion, dedicated to restoring and preserving the historic legacy of the British royal family. The proposal was first introduced during a dinner at Clarence House, attended by several wealthy Middle Eastern benefactors, most notably a group of influential businessmen from Qatar who had long expressed a desire to build lasting ties with the monarchy. At first, Charles suspected nothing. The king had always been passionate about heritage preservation, and the idea of creating a foundation to safeguard Windsor's legacy was something he had considered many times before. What he did not realize, however, was that behind the glossy promises of heritage and cultural duty, Camilla was quietly weaving a web of influence. And her partner in this scheme was none other than Prince Andrew. The brother of the royal family had long regarded as a national embarrassment. Ever since the sex scandal that destroyed his reputation, Andrew had lived in near total isolation. His royal duties had been revoked, his financial allowances withdrawn, and his image erased from official palace websites. But Camilla, a woman who had always known how to turn someone's weakness into an advantage, saw in Andrew a useful doorway. According to documents that later leaked to the press, it was Camilla who first suggested that Andrew re-enter public life quietly through charitable work. She promised to find a way for him to become involved with the Windsor Foundation, at least under the honorary title of advisor. But behind that symbolic gesture was a secret financial arrangement. Andrew was given access to 20% of the foundation's funds, amounting to over £3 million. The money was routed through multiple layers of accounts, disguised as operational and preservation expenses. The Qatari benefactors, well known for using wealth to buy influence, did not question it. For them, it was simply a way to forge direct connections with the powerful figures inside the palace. Camilla, meanwhile, kept her hands clean, at least on paper. She never appeared as the foundation's director, but she alone signed the partnership agreement with the Qatari donors, bypassing both the king's approval and the royal council, a serious breach of royal protocol. Ironically, several insiders had raised early concerns that the project smelled of money, yet no one dared to speak up. Camilla had secured quiet cooperation from key aides by promising promotions and privileges. As for Andrew, he saw this as his last chance at redemption, an opportunity to cleanse his tarnished name. The entire operation began to unravel when a financial officer at the foundation, a former Clarence House employee, stumbled upon irregular payments made to a private company linked to Andrew. When he reported the issue to the Royal Treasury Office, the matter quickly reached Charles's attention. The king's reaction was described by witnesses as unlike anything seen since his coronation. A man who valued the honor of the monarchy above all else, Charles felt deeply betrayed, not just by his brother, but by his wife. He summoned an emergency meeting at Sandringham, where Camilla and Andrew were forced to face his fury head-on. His voice was cold, measured, but cutting. Who authorized this? Camilla maintained her composure. She claimed her only intention was to help the family and create an opportunity for Andrew to reintegrate. She insisted she had no wish to overstep, saying her signature was a mere formality. But Charles was unmoved. He threw the contract onto the table and said icily, "With one signature, you've turned this crown into a bargaining chip." Those present described the atmosphere as suffocating. Andrew sat motionless, his head bowed. And for the first time since becoming queen, Camilla faced the full weight of Charles's anger, the kind of wrath only possible from a man who had once sacrificed his public image for love. Shortly after the confrontation, Charles ordered the immediate suspension of the Windsor Foundation and demanded a full audit of all funds tied to the Qatari donors. He also instructed Andrew to step down from any involvement and to leave Windsor to avoid further scrutiny. Sensing the scent of scandal, the press descended swiftly. Major outlets like the Times and the Daily Mail ran headlines suggesting that a new royal charity is under investigation for financial misconduct. Though none dared name Camilla outright, those who understood the palace knew perfectly well who had orchestrated the scheme. But this was no longer just a financial scandal. It was a devastating blow to the king's trust in his wife. For decades, Charles had believed Camilla was the one person who truly understood him. This time, though, was different. He began to see that power, when placed in the wrong hands, could be far more dangerous than betrayal itself. From that moment, the cracks in their seemingly unshakable marriage began to show. Camilla tried to soothe him, to mend the distance that had formed, but Charles quietly withdrew. He stopped sharing his worries, his thoughts, his heart. In their silence lay the most painful truth of all. The love that had once defied the world was now crumbling under the weight of disappointment. The story of the Windsor Foundation scandal was quickly smothered by the palace, but those on the inside knew the storm was far from over. In the British royal family, no secret stays buried forever, and this time the fuse had already been lit, threatening not only Camilla's reputation, but also the very trust the king had spent his entire life trying to preserve. What enraged the king wasn't just the money, and it was the true purpose behind the Windsor Foundation. What investigators uncovered next revealed a scheme few could have imagined, a political plan, meticulously crafted through a series of seemingly harmless meetings between Camilla and Prince Andrew. In June 2025, the Daily Mirror published a short article that sent shockwaves through the monarchy. Citing a source close to the palace, the report claimed that Camilla had secretly discussed a succession scenario with Prince Andrew, a topic strictly forbidden to anyone outside the senior royal circle. The conversation, according to the source, revolved around the possibility that King Charles might one day be unable to continue his reign due to health reasons. The article read, "Camilla is not only concerned about her own future in the event of the king's abdication, but is also planning to secure the position of Dowager Queen, a title that would allow her to retain advisory power and influence over the throne. In return, Prince Andrew would have his titles partially restored, regain a measure of public respect, and return to royal engagements, something he had long desired since the Epstein scandal destroyed his standing. The revelation stunned the British public, but that was only the tip of the iceberg. Behind the scenes, more evidence began to surface, putting Buckingham Palace in full crisis mode. An anonymous audio recording was sent to a senior editor at the Daily Mirror, a recording later described as a political bombshell that forced King Charles to finally break his silence. In the tape, a voice believed to be Camilla's could be heard, calm, cold, and calculating. "We've both been pushed aside while they prepare William to take over, but I won't let them do it so easily. I've been here long enough to know that the throne doesn't belong to blood alone. It belongs to those who know how to keep their influence." Andrew's voice followed, deep and hesitant. "But they'll never forgive me, Camilla. Not even Charles. He wants me gone from everything." Camilla paused for a few seconds before replying. "Then let him see that he still needs us. When the time comes, people won't be able to ignore those like us." According to royal experts, that line was the clearest sign yet that Camilla wasn't merely trying to protect herself. She was quietly building a shadow network of power, one where she and Andrew could reemerge as key figures in a post-Charles monarchy. A former palace advisor told The Guardian, "Don't forget, Camilla understands how both the media and royal politics work. She spent decades in the shadows, despised by the public, yet still became queen. For her, power isn't about the crown, it's about survival when the crown changes hands." And that, sources say, is precisely why she turned to Andrew, the only royal who truly understood what it meant to be cast aside yet still crave redemption. After their first meeting at Royal Lodge, the two continued to stay in touch through private calls and letters. A member of Andrew's secretarial staff later revealed they held at least 4 private meetings within 3 months, including one off-the-record session at Clarence House in late July. During that meeting, Camilla reportedly presented an informal proposal, a draft outlining how to preserve royal stability should Charles become unable to govern. The document contained 3 key points. Camilla would temporarily assume the role of royal advisor, overseeing charity work and ceremonial duties to maintain her image as the Queen of Compassion. Prince Andrew would have part of his honor reinstated and resume selective royal appearances under the title Guardian of the Windsor Legacy. Several senior aristocrats from the conservative bloc would be persuaded to lend their support, with promises that they would retain influence during the transition of power. This was no longer just idle gossip. In August, several businessmen who had previously funded Camilla's charitable foundations admitted they had been approached by close associates of Prince Andrew, urging them to support an expanded Windsor Foundation preservation program. The revelation raised eyebrows across the palace, especially since those very donors had once been loyal backers of Queen Elizabeth II's era, the same circle that had quietly supported Andrew before his disgrace. Piece by piece, the puzzle began to take shape. The Windsor Foundation that Camilla had established was no longer seen as a simple heritage project. It had become, in the eyes of investigators, a platform of power, a tool through which she had quietly reinforced her influence and prepared for a future without Charles. A former official from the Royal Treasury revealed that when a £3.2 million grant was approved, most of that money never went directly into restoration projects as planned. Instead, it was temporarily held in a secondary account controlled by a small circle of advisors close to Andrew. When King Charles discovered this, he reportedly lost control of his temper. He understood all too well that if money and influence could be redirected, then power within the palace could shift just as easily. But what broke the king's heart wasn't the financial deceit. It was the sense of betrayal. According to an internal palace source, Charles shouted at his advisor behind closed doors at Buckingham, "I lost Diana because of Camilla, and now I'm losing my throne because of her." That line was never made public, yet it spread through the corridors of the palace like a fracture that could never be mended. Andrew, on the other hand, remained calm. He stayed out of the public eye, but through close friends, sent a carefully crafted message to the press. "Everything I have done is for the stability of the royal family." Camilla, meanwhile, maintained her composure, smiling beside the king during royal engagements, acting every inch the devoted queen consort, as though nothing had happened. But those who had witnessed Charles's expression during those appearances said his eyes told a different story, the eyes of a man who no longer trusted anyone. The royal family's silence only deepened public suspicion. Analysts began to argue that this was not just a domestic dispute, it was a succession war, a covert battle over the future of the monarchy, where every move was strategic. If Charles were to abdicate, would Camilla truly secure the powerful title of Dowager Queen she long desired? Or would William, backed by the unwavering support of the public, strip away every trace of her influence? That was why many believed Camilla had chosen to act first. She knew time was no longer on her side, the king's health was faltering, and once the crown passed on, her power would vanish with it. Andrew was her only viable ally, a fallen prince, but still of royal blood, deeply connected to the old aristocracy and those who had once sworn loyalty to the late queen. This unlikely alliance, if successful, would allow Camilla to preserve her influence even after Charles was gone. But if it failed, it would destroy them both. And indeed, once the evidence began landing on the king's desk, Buckingham could no longer maintain its calm facade. It was said that on a bleak evening in early September, Charles personally summoned his legal advisors to discuss the possibility of separating all of the Queen's financial operations from the royal accounts. He reportedly declared his intention to end all ambiguity between the two centers of power within the monarchy. But perhaps, by then, it was already too late. The undercurrent that Camilla and Andrew had stirred was too powerful to contain. While the public speculated about the king's health, behind Buckingham's grand facade, another storm was quietly taking shape, one that would determine who truly held power when Charles could reign no more. By September 2025, the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace was heavy, almost electric, as though a thunderstorm were about to break. Staff were ordered to vacate the East Wing, where an emergency meeting, one of the rarest of its kind, was underway. No one knew exactly what was happening, but whispers echoed through the marble halls. Windsor Foundation. Camilla. Betrayal. Inside the grand, dimly lit conference room, pale light filtered through the tall glass windows, casting long shadows across the walls. King Charles sat at the head of the table, his face carved in stone, his hand gripping a thick folder so tightly that his knuckles whitened. Before him sat Queen Camilla and Prince Andrew, both silent, both waiting under the suffocating tension. At the far end of the table was Prince William, summoned urgently by his father, not just as a witness, but as the rightful heir. Without a single word of preamble, Charles rose to his feet. His eyes blazed as he stared at the two people closest to him. He threw the folder onto the table. The sharp crack of it hitting the wood echoed through the room like thunder. His voice followed, low, hoarse, but shaking with fury. You deceived me, both of you. The crown is not something to bargain with. The room fell into absolute silence. William lowered his gaze, avoiding his father's eyes. Camilla froze, and Andrew's face turned ashen. The folder lay open on the table, revealing copies of documents, emails, and confidential agreements tied to the Windsor Foundation, the very fund that Camilla and Andrew were alleged to have manipulated to control financial and political influence in the event of the king's abdication. Andrew was the first to speak, his voice trembling. I only wanted to help Camilla secure her position when you decide to rest, brother. It was all for the good of the family. That single line made Charles erupt. He strode forward, pointing a trembling finger at his brother. His voice was steel. The family? You call this helping? Using the royal name to strike backroom deals with Middle Eastern financiers? You've disgraced the Windsor legacy and turned this crown into a cheap bargaining chip. Camilla tried to steady herself, though fear flickered behind her composed expression. She spoke softly, trying to ease the storm. Charles, you've misunderstood. It's all part of a broader plan to preserve the Queen's legacy. No one ever intended to undermine you. But Charles cut her off sharply, his voice booming through the room. There is no misunderstanding. I've heard the recordings. I know exactly what the two of you were plotting behind my back. The air turned heavy, almost unbreathable. William slowly lifted his head, his face marked with disappointment. Everything he had been told over the past few days, by his own aides, was now confirmed by his father. The so-called plan for when Charles is no longer reigning was no longer a rumor. Charles turned to Camilla, his anger giving way to something deeper. Pain. I truly believed you were by my side, that we were in this together. And yet, while I've been fighting for my health, you've been planning for my absence. Camilla said nothing. She simply bowed her head, her trembling hands clasped together in her lap. In that moment, her silence was more terrifying than any denial. The meeting lasted for over an hour. No one dared to challenge the king's orders. His voice was cold, deliberate, final. Prince Andrew will be stripped of all remaining roles within the Windsor Foundation. Every account, every transaction linked to the fund is to be frozen and subject to an independent audit. He then turned to Camilla. As for you, Bahman, from this day forward, you are not to sign a single financial document connected to royal assets without my or Prince William's explicit approval. A senior advisor entered the room carrying a memorandum. When Charles's pen touched the paper, the faint scratch of ink felt like the sound of a declaration of war, not just against betrayal, but against the shadows that had crept into his own household. William stood quietly beside him, his chest heavy with conflicting emotions, sorrow for his father, disappointment in Camilla, and a cold dread at how power had once again torn their family apart. When the meeting ended, Camilla hurried out of the room, her face pale and drained. Andrew followed silently behind her, his head bowed, saying nothing. Only Charles and William remained, standing in the hollow silence of the room that seemed to echo with unspoken grief. You see, William, Charles murmured wearily, his voice breaking. Even in royalty, when hearts change, the throne becomes nothing more than an empty chair. William didn't reply. He simply nodded, knowing deep down that from this moment on, nothing between his father and Camilla would ever be the same again. Inside the grand but somber walls of Buckingham Palace, the night stretched endlessly. When Charles turned and walked away, his back seemed to have aged by several years. They said the lights in the palace's conference chamber burned past midnight that evening, as though the king himself could not rest after what had just transpired. A storm had passed, yet its echo would linger. For sometimes the deepest wounds do not come from enemies, but from the very people we once trusted most. News of the secret deal between the Queen Camilla and Prince Andrew couldn't be contained for more than 3 days. A palace staff member leaked the details to the Times, and by morning, every major paper ran explosive headlines. Camilla and Andrew, the alliance that threatens the British throne. Buckingham Palace in turmoil over shady dealings. The whole of Britain erupted. People began questioning whether the royal family was tearing itself apart, and if King Charles still had the strength to preserve the stability of the monarchy. Camilla's image, already long controversial, became the center of public outrage. On social media, she was branded the most ambitious woman in modern royal history. Inside Buckingham Palace, chaos reigned. All royal statements were frozen. Every upcoming public engagement involving Queen Camilla was abruptly canceled. Upon hearing the news, Prince William immediately returned from Norfolk to meet his father at Sandringham. According to a close source, the private talk between father and son lasted nearly 2 hours. A heavy, wordless exchange filled with tension. William was said to have told him quietly, "Father, you must remain silent, at least for now. Any explanation will only feed the fire." That single piece of advice stopped Charles from calling a press conference and helped the palace freeze the media storm during its most volatile hours. William personally met with the royal advisors to coordinate a response plan, preventing the scandal from spreading beyond Britain's borders. Within the family, Princess Anne was one of the few to speak out openly. She defended her brother before the royal council, stating firmly, "King Charles has dedicated his entire life to this family. No one, not even those closest to him, has the right to tarnish his honor." Her words silenced the room. Prince Andrew, following the king's outburst, was stripped of his remaining duties with the Windsor Foundation and lost access to his office at Windsor Lodge. Camilla, meanwhile, was ordered to take a 3-week private retreat to let the media frenzy cool down. During that time, she withdrew to Raymill House, her private residence in Wiltshire, the very place she once hid away when she was still Charles's lover. The palace grew cold and restrained. Advisors were replaced. The communications team was tightly monitored, and every royal financial record was put under scrutiny. A reign once considered stable after Queen Elizabeth II's passing now teetered on the edge, shaken by a single harmless agreement. And amid the chaos, only William remained composed. He quietly took on his father's royal duties, steadied public sentiment, and worked to rebuild the monarchy's image before the press. After the scandal, King Charles retreated to Sandringham, spending most of his days wandering his private gardens, where he once planted white roses in memory of his mother. There, he began to wonder, was the crown still his calling, or had it become his burden? A question only he could answer, the same man who had waited 70 long years to ascend the throne. Sandringham. On a bleak, late autumn afternoon, fine rain drifted across the garden where Charles walked each morning. He gazed at the white roses, once a symbol of peace, now only reminders of emptiness. After everything, the woman meant to share his twilighted years, Queen Camilla, had become the very name he could no longer bear to face. Camilla remained in London, but every internal royal meeting went on without her. The decision came directly from Charles, a quiet form of power isolation. According to one insider, he still loves her, but he no longer trusts her. A short sentence, yet one that revealed the heartbreak of a man who had given his whole trust to the woman he loved. At Windsor, Prince William carried on with royal duties in his father's stead, composed and detached. Andrew, once powerful, fell silent. He sent a handwritten letter to his brother, offering an apology and promising to withdraw completely from all royal matters. But some wounds no apology can heal. Within the opulent halls of the monarchy, it wasn't the throne that trembled. It was trust itself, that fragile thread binding love, power, and honor. Charles understood then. Losing trust was like losing one's own heart. And so Britain was left to wonder, was Camilla now paying the price for what she once did to Princess Diana? For betrayal. And more haunting still, after this storm of rage, would King Charles ever recover his heart? Or had he already lost it forever? In a war with no winners, only the shattered remnants of love and royal dignity,